So welcome everyone to this third seminar on the Israel-Palestine conflict organized in response to the ongoing genocide and in response to the university's silence on this matter. So my name is Sophie Christ, I'm a PhD student here. I'll be hosting today's seminar with Lucas Febraro, who's going to speak to us about the impact of social media in Israel's war on Palestine and the role of social media in amplifying voices and countering propaganda. Before we start, I'll just mention again that this is the third seminar that we're organizing, and you can see the other seminars on YouTube. Come and speak to Anna over here if you're interested and you don't know where to find that material. We also have an info stand over here where you can find information about how to get involved with the groups that are supporting these seminars and the ongoing actions at UIT. So I mentioned that this is in response partly to the silence of the university. So this is not a UIT organized event series, but rather organized by students and administrative staff, and with the support of the Students for Palestine group, the Art of Being Anti-Racist Initiative, Tromsø for Palestina, and the Palestina Committee in Tromsø. So you're most welcome to join any of these groups if you're not already part of that work. We welcome your solidarity and support. And again, there's an info stand over here where you can get more information on how to get involved and also how to access the recording of this seminar or of the past seminars. So as I mentioned, the theme of today's seminar is going to be on media, especially on the role of social media in amplifying voices and encountering propaganda. And I'm joined by Lucas Febraro are you joining us from Berlin? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Excellent. So Lucas is Brazilian-born, Berlin-based content creator, writer, and activist. He's communications director for DiEM25, which is a pan-European political movement, which will be contesting in the European elections this June with its political party, MERA25 in Germany, Greece, and Italy. And Lucas is joining us today in his capacity as a content creator and activist using social media to counter propaganda in the context of the ongoing genocide. So Lucas, thank you so much for joining us. Really delighted to have you here. We're going to be running this seminar a little bit different from the past ones where we kind of had presentations and then a Q&A, in that we'll host this as a conversation. So we'll try and involve all of you who are here in the room, as well as everyone who's on Zoom. If you have questions or you want to engage in the conversations with Lucas, just please post your questions in the chat and we'll read those out and you can engage in that way. Or if you're happy to, you're also welcome to unmute yourself and join in. We are recording the session. And for anyone in the room, if you'd like your questions to be anonymous, you can just log into the Zoom link and send your questions in the chat to Anna, and she'll read those out so you can join anonymously as well. So as a way to kick off, Lucas, I was hoping if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and the work that you've been doing over the past 6 months in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. You've been using social media avidly to counter propaganda. Can you tell us a bit about what you do, what platforms you're using, and how you see the impact of that work? What's the motivation behind it?
Sure. So there's kind of two elements here. First is the work that I've been contributing in my role within DiEM25 on DiEM25's social media channels, which is something that obviously has been ongoing since way before October. DiEM25 has always been very vocal in speaking up for the rights of Palestinians, in calling for an end to the occupation, an end to the apartheid in Israel and the occupied territories, and for a right of return of the Palestinian refugees. And we have a position which was voted on by all of our members, all of our hundreds of thousands of members, which is how DiEM25 works, which advocates for a one-state solution that accomplishes all the things that I just mentioned. That was in 2021. So we've been very vocal on this since the creation of DiEM25, and especially since we've had this official position for an end to the conflict. Obviously, that ramped up quite significantly after October, And I think, especially in places like Germany, we really started to differentiate ourselves from the political scene, and that includes obviously content that's published on social media. Not so much because we changed our position in any way, but just due to the fact that we saw a lot of movements, a lot of voices, also on the left, pretty much abandon the Palestinian cause, if they were even ever there to begin with, after October. And I've been very active, also, both in my role as a communications director and also managing hands-on the M25 social media accounts, especially on Instagram and on TikTok, in making content that highlights the hypocrisy of European politicians, that highlights the dire situation of people in Gaza, so on and so forth. That uh, proved to be hugely popular, and now I'm speaking personally here. That is an issue that I've always been very passionate about, and I became even more passionate about it after October. And it got to a point where I wanted to do even more. So I started also to get active, not just as a spokesperson online for DiEM25, but also on my own social media accounts, my personal ones. Before October, I had never really created content on my own personal social media channels. And then since November or so, I got active there as well on TikTok and on Instagram, which, in answer to your question, are the two platforms where I remain the most active.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's been really interesting to see your use of TikTok and Instagram and in sharing information. I was wondering if you could get into or share a bit more in depth with you what kind of content you share and what you see what are the messages and the aims of this kind of counter propaganda. I was interested in how you put that in the introduction to your profile on TikTok, for example.
Yeah, I think I do a lot of different things, like in the sense that the tone can vary quite a lot, and the sort of the format can vary quite a lot. It's always video, pretty much always video. So there's also that sort of unifying factor. But there's a lot of differences in the sense that sometimes I speak in a very matter of fact, serious way about very serious things that are happening, and sort of like explainer type videos, telling people about what's going on in Gaza at the moment. Um, just doing recap of news events, things like that, headlines, articles. And there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of more sarcastic, humorous content. Sometimes it's still sort of the same format in which I'm basically just a talking head speaking, directly to the camera. Still about the same type of content, but with a different tone. And sometimes it's just comedy sketches, really. I've found that is very effective in delivering the message very often. Of course, you need to have a bit of common sense here. There's a genocide going on. You can't really joke about everything, and the the goal isn't really to joke about anything ever at all. It's just the fact that sarcasm and irony are effective tools to deliver serious political messages, even though on the surface they might seem kind of lighthearted. If you really watch the content, you see that at the end of the day, it's not really. So there's all that, and yeah, I sort of the unifying factors is in technical terms, of course, like I mentioned, they're all video, but also they're all, I think, most of it is, in my opinion, counter-propaganda in the sense that it's either countering Israeli propaganda directly. There's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of countering things that you see in Western media and things that are said or written by commentators in the West, which, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most of the people in the room here, can also pretty easily qualify as propaganda.
Yeah, brilliant. And on this topic of the Israeli propaganda and the way that that's been picked up by, or at least not challenged by, conventional media in Europe, and you mentioned this kind of abandonment, even from leftist groups in Europe, of the Palestinian people. One question we had was, how do you think Israel succeeded in those first months, at least, of this ongoing genocide, so since October, to kind of convince the West of some of that propaganda that clearly had some collective punishment or genocidal intent? How did we see that spread so much, or like not get challenged in conventional European media?
I mean, I don't think that's
Western.
anything new. It's just a continuation of this sort of how Western media, mainstream media operates by and large with regards to Israel. It's sort of always been that way. I think the difference is that Israeli propaganda has become more crass and less sophisticated, and more easily countered, which you would think would also lead to it being less effective on mainstream media. To an extent, you can see that a little bit. You know, I'm not here to defend the Western mainstream media in any way, but especially as time goes on, you do start to see the questioning of Israeli narratives coming from rather unexpected places sometimes. With regards to, you know, if you think about the Al-Shifa hospital, for example, in the first time that Israel invaded it, and you know the claims of the networks of tunnels, there was some pushback after the fact when you know some Western mainstream outlets analyzed the evidence and saw that there wasn't really much there. But of course, these are exceptions, unfortunately. Why has it been that effective? That's a question that is difficult to answer because it's such a long-standing thing that it occurs, I think, almost by reflex at this point. You know, like Western journalists, they just don't know how to do it any other way. They just take IDF press releases as gospel, and they just don't know how to operate in any in a proper journalistic way when it comes to Israel. And I think also in the early days, there was also, of course, the emotional factor of, you know, the fact that the situation in Gaza, although, you know, pretty much immediately war crimes were being committed and civilians were being indiscriminately bombed. But what was really fresh in people's minds were the images and the accounts of the Hamas attack of October 7th. So there was also that immediate sort of emotional kind of wave of support that Israel naturally benefited from.
Yeah, thanks. It is a really difficult question, isn't it, of how that propaganda manages to spread, and also a question of why the public in the West are willing to kind of take some of that up. Before asking a question that maybe changes the topic a little bit, I wanted to see if there's anyone in the audience who wants to jump in, if there's questions either online or in the room. Feel free to just pop your hands up because we'll take it kind of conversationally. So over here, and feel free to share your name as well. Because unfortunately, we didn't manage the camera so that you can see the person speaking to you, but.
Hello, Abdul Khalid Mansour from Palestine, Tromsø for Palestine. I would like to ask about how much the social media take the power of ethical media in general from the traditional media. We saw before that Israel and all people that support her try to convince us in them traditional way by sending, and we see in the first days some journalists acting that they have get attack or someone is trying to kill them, but social media take that all from them back. Do you think that this tool in the war in Palestinian case started to be affected not only for Palestinian, it is only to real journalists to rethink about ethical work because they cannot be hide like before. Do you think social media give them that power or not?
Yes, I do. I think that's pretty evident. I mean, if it wasn't, I have a lot of criticism of social media, you know, and if we can get into it, and I can talk about at length of all of the things that I despise about it. But I think it is very difficult to argue that the the Palestinian cause at the moment would be faring any better if social media wasn't present. I think pretty much everyone can agree that it'll be a lot worse across the board. That's for I think a couple of different reasons. First is what's the journalistic work that people in Gaza have been doing, not only journalists in Gaza, journalists by profession, but you know, all the victims of this genocide in Gaza have been performing in getting those images out there, showing what's actually going on the ground. It's sort of a cliche to say at this point that this is the first live streamed or live televised genocide, and it is very true. So there's that, you know, there's only so much propaganda that Israel can do, no matter how hard they try, that can counter, you know, these images that we're seeing firsthand, which wasn't the case before, of course, in other attacks and war crimes committed against Palestinians. That's the first element. And the second element is by giving voice to people out there outside of Palestine as well, to inform people and to deliver messages that you obviously don't see in traditional media because they're shut down immediately. So, you know, the work that so many, especially younger people, have been doing. I often joke that there are certain people, you know, like 20-year-olds publishing content on TikTok who respect journalistic standards a lot more than Western journalists do at the moment, and who perform journalistic work that's way more valuable than, say, you know, the editors of the New York Times. And so there's that as well. Of course, there is a lot of constraints into how we can act within social media, because at the end of the day, there's a set of tools that's built under a particular economic and power system. You know, it wasn't made to spread awareness of war crimes. It was made to produce mindlessly entertaining content so that they can sell ads and get really rich. The social media platforms, I mean. So there's a lot of challenges that come with making content within this context. But to answer to your question, absolutely, it has been extremely valuable, and we will be a lot worse off if it didn't exist.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any more questions on this topic from the audience? Or yeah, Anna, go ahead.
There is a question from the Zoom call. So I will be reading it. We have seen people's places being rallied by the police or others losing their jobs or taking a position in the conflict and standing for Palestine in any shape or form, even for merely sharing their opinion on social media. Are there any kind of protections or institutions that help the censored people in this kind of cases?
Yeah, so there is an institution. I think they operate Europe-wide, the ELSC, I want to say. Sometimes I mess up the acronym, but I'm assuming many of you here will be familiar with their work. They provide free legal assistance to people who are being persecuted in such ways. Again, I'm not entirely sure where they operate, but I'm pretty sure it's Europe-wide. And of course, they're in different countries and different cities. There are other organizations providing legal assistance to people in those cases as well. Of course, unfortunately, they're few and far between. Although it is very heartening to see just how many of them have been providing this type of service. And of course, it's also it's scandalous that this work needs to be performed in the first place, and that people, like the author of the question said, are getting their homes raided over posts that they made on social media, which has happened in Berlin on multiple occasions in the past few months. But thankfully, there are organizations out there that are working to support these people.
Thank you. Anna, do you have any more questions online? Not for now. Then I'd love to pick up a bit more about the way that social media is perceived and what you talked about in terms of, social media being really key to give people who are oppressed or who don't have another channel a voice, but also that it's not a perfect medium. And one of the critiques that's quite interesting and that often comes from academic channels and from some conventional media against social media is that it's sort of a threat to democracies. It's a place where you can spread misinformation and sort of false claims, etc. And I was wondering on your reflections on that, and is that a fair critique? Does it seem to actually embed some racist undertones as well, considering what kind of voices do come through social media? And how does that sit in relation to conventional media outlets maybe claiming a sense of neutrality that could be debated?
I mean, it is true, of course. You can make completely unfounded claims on social media, and that can spread very fast. But you kind of alluded that at the end of your question already. It's not it's not as different as some would like to think with regards to traditional media. You see, for example, just to mention the New York Times again, with the article that they published a while ago on the reports of the systematic use of sexual violence on October 7th. Those, the reporter who was the key contributor in that article was not a reporter pretty much at all to begin with. As a matter of fact, she was a former Israeli security officer. Sorry, intelligence officer. And they still haven't retracted some of the claims there that were refuted even by family members of some of the victims from October 7th, who they claimed were victims of sexual violence. So yes, it happens on social media. It happens on traditional media. It comes out of the mouths of politicians. It's said in squares, in parks and bars and family meetings. Anyone can make claims which are completely unfounded, and it can spread very quickly. So I tend to personally, I acknowledge that there are threats involved with it. I don't consider them to be as fundamental as many others, in the liberal establishment seem to think, like they are a threat to democracy. In and of themselves, I don't think they are at all, because this has always occurred. But it can happen. And I think when it does happen, it's important to combat it, I think, primarily in the same forums in which they are being spread. So, if misinformation is being spread, you refute it with, proper information using the same channels. So I tend to take a view that I don't like to give the corporations that run social media platforms any more power than they already have, which is a lot of power, a lot more than they should have to begin with. So I'm not comfortable with these companies having, apart from everything, all the power that already have, the economic power, also having the power to decide what is true and what is false in political discourse.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, the last one, I feel, about the commercial power that you see in social media platforms. And could you speak a little bit more to that? How do you reconcile the kind of the corporate ownership and the commercial interest behind these platforms with their kind of liberatory potential? Is it, I mean, I guess you can talk about that conceptually, but also kind of practically, because you hear a lot about issues like the algorithm kind of controlling the content that shows up, or you have issues of kind of shadow banning or censorship that happens on these platforms. How do you navigate that as someone who's using social media to elevate voices of Palestinians?
Well, there are some very basic precautions that you need to take. So you need to read the community guidelines and make sure that you're a good boy and you try not to violate them. I have unfortunately run afoul of TikTok's community guidelines a couple of times. My videos get taken down routinely because a tool that Zionists use a lot. And I think, it's a tactic in social media in general, but I think especially among inside that group in the past few months is mass reporting content, even though it violates nothing. And certain platforms, TikTok especially, are very trigger happy in taking content down just because it's being reported numerous times, but without really taking a look. I don't think when they do it for the first time, at that stage, no human that works at TikTok has even taken a look at the content. It's just an algorithm picking up on a certain number of reports until it reaches a certain threshold, and then the video is taken down automatically. Pretty much every time I post a video on TikTok that goes viral, I can rest assured that by the time I wake up the next day, it would have been taken down. And then I have to appeal, by which stage I believe a human actually looks at the content. And in 99% of the cases, the video is restored. It only did not happen on one occasion. If you recall, a few months ago, there was this CCTV footage that emerged from the West Bank of Israeli commandos disguised as doctors and nurses invading a hospital to execute suspected terrorists. I posted a video about that, showing that CCTV footage, and it got taken down, and I got a strike on TikTok because there's a point in their community guidelines that says that you're not allowed to glorify the use of weapons or show them in being used in a place which is not appropriate. It's not my fault that they're being used in a hospital. It's the Israeli government's fault, but I digress. So you have to be aware of those things. I've learned my lesson. I won't post footage of Israeli soldiers, being naughty with their weapons anymore. I'll just talk about it without showing the footage. So you have to play by those rules. You also have to understand what the algorithm wants. Unfortunately, that's something that you have to understand very keenly if you're going to be successful in doing this sort of thing. And like I said in the beginning, this is an algorithm that was made to reward content that is immediately engaging, that's very direct to the point, that is not really made to inform. That was never the intent. It's made to entertain. That's how those platforms were conceived, as entertainment. So unfortunately, you have to play by those rules as well. So I always try to make sure that my videos will immediately grab people's attentions by saying something provocative, posing a question, something or the other. So of course you have to play by those rules, and a lot of people just can't stand to stoop that low, which I understand. But at the same time, I think we can't abandon those spaces, because every space that we choose to abandon, the bad people are not going to do it. They're going to keep doing their thing. So I think it's important that we're contesting politically in every single space in which we can. That includes out on the streets, that includes in parliaments, and city councils, and in official institutions, and that includes forums like social media as well.
Yeah, that's a really strong message, actually, of keeping the presence and keeping on countering propaganda that happens there. I think we have a couple of messages from the Zoom. Do you want to read them out?
Yes, so the first question is, do you think that the ICJ case wouldn't be that strong without social media? Especially we saw that a lot of evidence was related on video published on social media.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's another thing, another way in which social media has been valuable that we haven't really talked about yet. Just I mean, we talked about the images that we're seeing from Gaza published by Palestinians in Gaza. Haven't really talked about the stuff that Israel is happy to show themselves with the soldiers, with their genocidal actions, their genocidal um, statements, chants, of course, politicians as well, although that mostly happens outside of social media. But that has been extremely valuable because we get to, this is the first genocide live stream, not only by the victims, but by the perpetrators as well. And I think it's, it was very affecting for me, and I'm sure for, millions of other people as well, that for the first few months of this massacre, we were seeing these things published on social media like they're travel vlogs, like Israeli soldiers just gleefully making even comedy sketches sometimes, just right they're about to, as they're about to blow up a building for no reason or something like that. And that's something that affects you in an extremely deep way. Like, what type of world do we live in? That these platforms that were made for entertainment. These are the type of thing that's posted there without a care in the world now, which, by the way, are allowed to stay up, as opposed to the video that I mentioned of me denouncing Israelis for raiding a hospital. You see tons of videos of Israeli soldiers doing all sorts of horrible, criminal things in Gaza that is allowed to stay up for whatever reason. But that was extremely horrifying, and there was a sense of relief a little bit. I'm not saying that anything was won when that happened, but there was a sense of relief of like, okay, things are being put back where they belong a little bit, when during South Africa's presentation of their case against Israel, you saw those same videos, those same images shown uh, in court in The Hague, which is where those images belong, because they're a documentation of war crimes.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pretty powerful moment, actually, to see that being used for what it should be, as evidence of war crimes and genocide. Anna, do we have another question from Zoom?
We have two right now. Should I just start with one first?
Yeah, go for it.
Because they're quite different.
Okay.
So the first is, do you think it's a matter of time to reach, so the control level reaches social media as a traditional media, especially after what is happening with TikTok in the US?
That's an open question, really. You are seeing them, tightening things considerably already. You see things happening like accounts being taken down for no reason, that sort of thing that people are more familiar with, those more obvious instances of repression. But the insidious thing is that the social media platforms, because they're black boxes and they are not accountable in divulging details about their algorithm, for example, and what sort of content is being prioritized and what's not and why. They also get to just simply do what is known as shadow banning, which is just reducing the reach of content without explicitly saying that you violated this or that guideline, and therefore your account has been your reach has been punished essentially as a result. A lot of times, especially on platforms like TikTok, they don't really say it. You just it's quite evident that something's going on, but they don't let you know in any way. So you see that happening, I think, more and more already. I mean, one recent example, which is not only related to Palestine, but probably also due to the fact that this is a election year, a presidential election year in the US. Meta just introduced this policy on Instagram, which by default shows people less political content. And if you want to not have that applied, you have to opt into it because it's switched on by default once you get that update on Instagram. So you have to go to settings, you have to go to content preferences or whatever, and then take a toggle that will keep political content coming to you as it was before. So you see those things happening because they don't want to spark the ire of policymakers who want the exact type of thing that I just told you a few minutes ago that I definitely don't want, which is for these companies to become the arbiters of what's true and what's not. They don't want that role for themselves either, you know, because that's not particularly good for their business. It is good for them politically, I guess, but their primary concern is in just operating unimpeded and collecting ad money. So they don't really like, they're being strong-armed into becoming arbiters of truth by policymakers, which is just incredible. And you see that with the attempts to ban TikTok in the US as well. Also, it's important to mention that not only are these companies extremely powerful economically, they already have a lot more power than they should. But it's important to keep in mind that the people who have, you know, the phone numbers of Mark Zuckerberg and of Elon Musk and other social media oligarchs like that are, you know, the president of Israel, the president of the United States, U.S. Senators and congressmen and congresswomen who are by and large Zionists, you know. So it's important to keep that in mind as well, that who has access to these to the people who make decisions in these companies to begin with.
Brilliant. I think, should we just continue? There's quite a few questions coming in. So go ahead, Anna.
So the next one is: communication with short videos, memes, and even humor or sarcasm is excellent for criticism and opposition, but how do you feel about its ability to put forward solutions, build bridges, and gather consensus for lasting solutions? At a time of when horrifying crimes against humanity are underway, it makes sense to focus on opposition, but I worry that might be the only focus possible on social media. Do you have any concerns about the polarizing effect of social media?
I don't know if I would say that I have concerns about it. I certainly have less concerns than most people do. As a matter of fact, I think the term polarization in and of itself doesn't really mean a whole lot, you know? Like if the polarization is between an ideology that is racist to its core, that wants ethnic cleansing, that wants the genocide of a people, and then people who are very much against that, I'm fine with the polarization and I'm fine with being in one of the poles of this polarization. If it's between justice and injustice, I'll be on the side of justice. I don't care how polarized it gets. But look, I take social media for what it is. Social media is, the author of the question is completely right that it's not really the forum where you're going to sit down as a society and argue for solutions to complex topics. You can help publicize the solutions. You can help raise awareness for these solutions. You can even use comedy to do that. So it has tremendous value if it's used correctly. But it is a tool, you know. At the end of the day, nothing is a replacement for what is really the bread and butter of a political struggle since time immemorial, which is organizing, which is building spaces in which these exchanges can take place. And so that we, and also at the policymaking level, of course, so that these solutions can be built, that support can be garnered for them, and then they can then be implemented and turn into policy. I'll just add to finish my answer, though, that it's important to realize, I think, that dialogue and persuasion are not the only tactics available in political struggle. I think there's a very liberal way of looking at things that we kind of take for granted sometimes, that we need to sort of uncondition ourselves from thinking. It can be extremely valuable. It will always be a very important tool. But in the case of Israel-Palestine, I think that has failed utterly. Diplomacy has been tried, dialogue and persuasion has been tried for decades. It has never led to anything except more ethnic cleansing and more oppression for Palestinians. So I think it's time that we switch to a different tactic, the tactic of pressure. I think that's why movements such as the BDS movement, for example, are so valuable, because they are not really about persuasion or convincing. They're about pressure. Pressure, not for the sake of pressure, but to achieve concrete goals, which is in their case an end to the occupation, an end to apartheid, and the right of return of refugees. So they are attacked left and right by with the accusation that they're just burning bridges and they're not helping convince people within Israel. That's not a tactic that they're using, and I think they're right not to do it, because that tactic has failed and needs to be retired as far as Israel-Palestine is concerned.
Amazing, thanks. Anna, do you want to read the next question out too?
Is there a risk that social media activism can be a pacifier, where activists waste a lot of time in pointless discussions with trolls or Zionists, making them feel that they have done a lot, but essentially only end up sitting on their couch preaching for the choir? Are there ways in which we can convert the massive movement on social media to other forms of activism?
Yes, and I can speak from experience with regards to that, because I am also involved in on-the-ground grassroots organizing here in Berlin as a member of DiEM25 and of Merit25. And we've seen tremendous numbers of people join our meetings, join the movements, join the party. And I think we're stronger now than we've ever been in the history of DiEM25. And that's as a result, by and large, of social media. And I know that because I've heard it from people attending those meetings, that's what took them there. Many of them have never been politically active in their lives, but they saw the content that we've been publishing on social media. Sometimes the content that I publish on a personal basis as well. And they got motivated enough to stop just liking and sharing this content on social media, but actually getting politically active. Of course, I'm using the example of DiEM here, but basically just about any pro-Palestine or organization that you want to think of who are active on social media and who have been successful on social media, I can pretty much guarantee you that they have just floods of new members coming in. I know that's the case with Jewish Voice for Peace as well, for example. I think I've just been told that they've had to find a different office space in New York. It might even be several offices just because they couldn't have as many people as wanted to show up now and volunteer for them in their old space. So I think it's easier than people think for someone to be galvanized by something that they see on social media enough that they then decide to take actions and decide to turn up at demonstrations, decide to join a movement, decide to join some sort of group where they live and get organized. So I do think that social media has that role as well, that is often minimized, also by activists, and I think activists need to be aware of this. There was a second part of your question that I just forgot. Oh yes, the wasting time discussing with trolls. Look, yes, that's one of the pitfalls of social media that you need to try very hard to resist. I could spend all my time basically just arguing with Zionist trolls online. It's very tempting to do that sometimes because you can get really riled up when you see a comment that's not particularly bright. But I take a deep breath and I try my best not to do that. As a matter of fact, I've pretty much never done it, even though I've had ample opportunity to do it. just because it's a waste of time, you know, and whether they're doing that consciously or not, in trying to bait you to waste your time, it is a waste of time to get involved in those things. So that's one of the things that you need to be aware of when you get active on social media. Always ask yourself, am I spending my time in a productive way here in order to achieve the goals that I think are important for this cause, for this movement? Or am I losing myself in this sort of vicious cycle, which social media does encourage, you know, in the way that it's set up? You know, they encourage you to reply to comments, even reply to comments in videos and doing that sort of thing. It's important that you are aware of those things and resist them.
Thank you. Yeah, I think anyone who has engaged in kind of activism on social media platforms know how easy it is to get down the rabbit hole of the comments and having these fights, which can be, as you say, extremely time consuming. Do we have more questions from Zoom or in the room? There's a question here at the back.
Hello. I think we are obviously seeing the global rise in the public criticism towards Israel and seeing the need for justice for Palestinians. But if we are to compare the mainstream media versus the social media, I think the mainstream media try heavily to keep people confused politically about what's happening and at the same time hiding as much as possible from the facts. Here came the social media to show the reality of everything. But with this global rising, there's a lot of people left in the gray area between who are not pro-Zionist, but they are not having enough courage or capacity to shift into the other side. If we are to rely on social media as alternative, what is the recipe to get these people more involved? Because the other option is the mainstream media, and if they are not able to sell the propaganda, at least they keep you confused in this two-sided, and at least they will portray it as a humanitarian crisis, which is not where we want people to be stuck in their knowledge and understanding of media, more of a stronger alternative to drag people to be more activist and politically engaged.
But try to answer, then you let me know if I understood the question correctly. But I think in part I already answered it in the answer to a previous question about getting people active as opposed to just interact on social media. I think that happens again more than people realize. Very often you don't even need to necessarily tell people to get active or tell people to you know, get out there and get organized. But it occurs as a consequence of you delivering an effective message on social media. Of course, if you can deliver this effective message with an explicit call to action for people to get active, even better. And I think you also alluded a little bit to the question of, you know, this gray area of, let's say, you described it as confused in a way like people who are not committed, you know, to one side or the other. Look, I think a lot of people will say that, well, on social media, you're always stuck in your little bubble, right? So the algorithm understands that you're a leftist who's pro-Palestine, so it's only going to show you content who is made for people who are leftists and pro-Palestine. So things that you already agree with. That's very true to an extent. That's how it works. When I open my you know TikTok, I'm not flooded with content published by Zionists because the TikTok algorithm knows very well that those are not the things that I like. However, I think we kind of forget also the fact that social media is still a medium for people to stay connected with friends, with family, and here we need to broaden this a little bit as well, not just to traditional social media platforms, but also instant messaging, you know, like WhatsApp, that type of thing. Where I come from in Brazil, WhatsApp is an extremely important tool of political communication. There's pretty much every political party has like a WhatsApp channel that people can join, where they publish content there much in the way that they do on social media, that is made for people to then share with their contacts on WhatsApp. So family members, friends, etc. That, the algorithm has a lot less power over that. This is still an area in which we have a little bit more personal agency. And I think that's the primary way in which the content that you make, which if the algorithm had it their way, would only be shown to people who already agree with you to begin with, it can escape that bubble. So you need to make content that not only the algorithm likes, but that's also shareable by human beings. A human being will watch this and will want to share this with their friends and family, very often the friends and family that they disagree with. And because we're all, everyone in the room here is politically minded, we're in a bubble as we speak in a way as well. I think we kind of tend to minimize a little bit how effective that can be as well, because we're way less prone. If I show you a video made by a Zionist, the Zionists are loving, I can pretty much guarantee that none of you would turn into Zionists as a result. But you'll be surprised how much that may be the fact with people who don't really think about politics that much. If they see a video or a post or whatever that is that's good enough, that delivers a message well enough, it can very well change their minds forever on a political topic. So we need to keep that in mind as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any more questions in the room? Otherwise, I know there's one on Zoom. I'll hand over to that. A nice practical question for tips, I think.
Could you please give us tips on how you structure your videos, both the satirical and informative ones? As a fan of your important, effective work, I want to also say you lit my path to Mera 25, so thank you.
Thank you. An example of someone who got active as a result of social media. Maybe you were active already. I don't want to take all the credit for it by any means. Yeah, that's a very important question. And it's obviously something that I think about a lot, and I try to sort of impart some of the lessons that I've learned, because I'm by no means a veteran in this. I kind of learned by doing, mostly really just since October. But I think that you need, first of all, to really bring it down a level and realize that you're trying to appeal to people, first and foremost, who, again, are not very politically minded. They're not people who, take part in the sort of discussions that we're having right now, for example. And that's the one thing. And the other thing is what the algorithm likes, which I've alluded to before. So if you put those things together, and something that I already mentioned earlier in the discussion is that I try to grab people's attention immediately. I think that's really, really important, and that's something that people, even if they understand it in concepts, they don't really know how to put it into action. Sometimes it can be extremely simple, like to a level that's almost offensive. It's you almost feel like you're disrespecting your audience, but no, it works. I'll give you a concrete example. I made a video recently. When I say recently, about a month ago, talking about the repression that Jewish people have been facing in Germany, anti-Zionist Jews, of course. And you see that these people are disproportionately affected when it comes to, for example, cancellations that are suffered by Jewish academics and artists. And there was a statistic collected by Diaspora Alliance, a movement which I think is based here in Berlin. They did an accounting of all the instances of public cancellations of events and that sort of thing, due to accusations of anti-Semitism. And they found that 30% of those cancellations, in 30% of those cases, the person being canceled was Jewish themselves. the person who was canceled for anti-Semitism. Now, the Jewish population in Germany is not even 1%. It's like 0.3%, something like that. So that means that Jews are overrepresented by 10,000% in instances of public cancellation due to anti-Semitism, being canceled by and large by white Germans, of course. Now, I wanted to make a video about that. And I knew that I had to grab people's attention immediately. If you just say the number, like if I just do it the way that I did it here, it would probably not be very effective because it just takes too long to get into the meat of it, the part that's really shocking. I could lead with a statistic. That would be fine because in this case, that is quite shocking. It's quite attention grabby. So I could just start the video by saying 30% of people being canceled for anti-Semitism in Germany are Jewish. That's fine, but I wanted to do better than even better than that. So I decided to simply phrase the statement as a question. And ask people to guess a number. So I started by saying something along the lines of, I want you to guess what's the percentage of artists and academics being canceled for anti-Semitism in Germany, which are Jewish themselves. Something along those lines was a little tighter, a little bit punchier. Now, that sounds almost stupid in how simple it is. But it's extremely effective. As a matter of fact, you start getting things that, like, for example, people started actually guessing and posting when they share the video in the story or in the comments, what was the percentage that they guessed, I never thought that anyone would actually do that when I thought that up. So again, my advice at the end of the day would be for you to look at content which you like, which is really effective, and just dissecate it, just study it, and try to learn those little tricks that you see being used, no matter how simple they might be. So simple, in fact, that at first it might not even seem like it was unconsciously. And then just try to sort of build an arsenal, so to speak, and then use it in your own content when you publish it.
Thank you. It's kind of genius how you can play also then on the way the platforms are structured around, wanting engagement and wanting interaction in your activism in that way. I think there's one more question from Zoom.
We know that some Palestinian activists on social media inside the Gaza Strip are on the IDF's wanted list. Do you think that will make some people afraid from exposing IDF, or did it make it more clear to some people how social media is important and then to engage on social media?
I think both things are true. Obviously, it makes a lot of people rightly more fearful of expressing their views on social media. In fact, you've seen that happen both within Israel and outside of it. I remember they passed this law, directive, I don't know what it was, a few months ago, that glorifying terrorism or something like that can lead to a prison sentence. Or paraphrasing here, I'm sure that's not exactly what it was, but I remember seeing a video from within Israel of a Palestinian having the police show up at her home and then arrest her and her husband because of something they allegedly posted on WhatsApp about October 7th. Not even a message that they sent to a friend, but like a status. You have like a line in which you can post a little phrase as a status on your WhatsApp profile. Don't remember what it was, but they got arrested for it. Obviously, they live in Israel, so it wasn't anything insane, just like glory to Hamas or anything like that. But it was, I guess, in the Israeli government's view, open to interpretation enough that they decided to interpret it in the least favorable way and arrest them. And obviously, you see it happening outside of Israel as well. We mentioned the example of Germany. We had a woman who had her home raided by police a few weeks ago for social media posts, for posting, I think on a couple of occasions, I don't think she even posted it herself, but she shared a post that included the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is being severely repressed in Germany. So yeah, she got her home raided, which is, I mean, it's insane that you get persecuted to begin with for such statements, but it's even more insane that you get your home raided by police as a result, which is something that should only ever happen if there is an actual active threat that a person, you know, is a threat to public security, might flee or whatever, or that you expect to find a stack of weapons in their house. Obviously, no reason to think that any of those were the case here. So I think both things can be true. You see the repression, and you see the repression work in the sense that people get more fearful of expressing their views on social media. But you also see people realizing that it really matters. You know, it really, if they're doing this, it's because it has an effect. And Israel is terrified of social media. They are terrified of the shift in views on Israel, the generational shift, the fact that they're losing younger people. They're terrified. There's nothing that scares them more in the world than this generational shift. And they're trying to work against it very hard. And because the way that young people communicate and the way that they receive news even is by and large social media, then obviously that is a huge focus for them, which is why they spend so much time harassing TikTok, calling them anti-Semites, and saying that they have to crack down on anti-Israeli content, and same thing with other social media platforms. So both of these things can be true. I don't hold it against anyone who has to fear for their safety, and as a result, decides not to be as vocal as they would wish to be on social media. But I think it becomes even more important for people like me who have to fear that a lot less, to make sure that we become even more vocal on those platforms.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? Or other questions online for now? I have one then. You talked about the role or the crucial role of social media in the ICJ case brought by South Africa, which was heard in February. There's an ongoing case against Germany this week, Nicaragua against Germany, concerning Germany's complicity in genocide through sales of weapons. I was wondering if you, being based in Berlin and kind of having your head down in the media conversations in Germany, what role is social media playing in this particular case, if any? What do you kind of see happening through social media?
It's one of those instances in which, if you want to talk about media, social media is the only place in which this discussion, to the extent that it is a discussion in German society, is happening, because traditional media has pretty much a complete blackout on reporting on this. Of course, the editorial boards of every single mainstream publication in Germany is for Israel, and they are against the Nicaragua's case, to say the least. But they are not even, fighting back against it and reporting on it or anything. It's just, you go to the website of the biggest newspaper in the country, like Zeit, like I did the day after Nicaragua presented their case, and at first, I had to use the search function because I couldn't find anything on the page. And when I used the search function, I saw like one little thumbnail towards the end about what happened in the Hague on Monday. So social media is really where it's taking place, apart, of course, from people on the ground. There's actually, as we speak, an encampment in front of the Bundestag building here in Berlin, that's been set up by activists for a week or a month, I think maybe a month, until the verdict is announced, at least, I think. So these are those more grassroots places of political communication and activism and contention are the only places in which this is being publicized. So again, it's a very important example of the role that social media has to play when traditional media refuses to accurately report on events that, of course, are of vital to the public interest. Because regardless of what you think of the Nicaragua case against Germany, it is a major event in the history of a country to stand accused of facilitating genocide in international in the ICJ in The Hague. So it's something that obviously traditional media should be reporting on. They're not. So the work is being done by activists and others on social media.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing those insights. I was wondering if, yeah, if it's a case of the blackout of reporting or if it's kind of negative reporting on what's going on. Are there any questions? Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for how to begin a conversation with, like, say, friends and family in Germany, say on WhatsApp, a WhatsApp video. It's what I've experienced. I have some family in Germany and some in the US. And when I've tried to share stuff, I just get like, I don't want to hear about this at all. And I'm wondering if there's, besides there's the approach of getting people's attention on posts, on videos, but then when you are, you want to sort of enter more of a dialogue with somebody who is mainly just being affected by mainstream media or the Zionist propaganda.
Well, that's a tough one because if people don't want to hear about it, and they would immediately just see one word, Palestine or Israel, and they will immediately just shift their attention away. That's an extremely challenging thing to type of behavior to sort of get through the door there. But I think your best chance remains by applying some of the same principles that I was talking about before. They're valuable not only for people who are creating content, but also for people who are sharing it, who are helping spread it. So I think it's just as important for you in that capacity to understand your audience, even if your audience is, your mom or your dad or your uncle or someone in your family or someone who's very close to you. You're still trying to communicate something to your audience, so that the same general principles that people who work in communications like I do use can be applied there as well. So I think the best you can do is by choosing something that is either very informative or very entertaining, or both. This is sort of the holy grail. There wasn't managed to do both, but one or the other at least. You have to understand the person's sort of personality. You have to understand your audience to keep continue to use the professional jargon. But if you're trying to send a video to your 18-year-old cousin, you might go with like a satirical comedy sketch or something like that. Of course, if trying to send something to your uncle who's a professor, then you're gonna probably want to use something different. But either way, something that is either very informative or very entertaining, and that grabs attention immediately. It can either in some type of content, like I've done comedy sketches that begin with me literally like banging on the table. So it can be very sort of rudimentary like that. And that proved to be successful. Or if it's something that's supposed to be informative, can be something along the lines of the example that I gave, or like, guess what's the percentage of people in Germany, of Jews in Germany, sorry, of people getting canceled for anti-Semitism in Germany who are Jewish. And just basically hope that eventually you're going to send the one video or the one post or the one article, whatever it might be, that's going to do the trick for you. And in terms of like how to inform people, look, never underestimate how poorly informed people are on the history of Palestine. I've, over the past few months, met countless people who are activists now, who are extremely knowledgeable on Palestine, who are very active in building movements and making things happen, who will say like, look, a year ago, I had no idea what the Nakba was. So never underestimate that, and like look for content that explains these basic facts in a very simple, very digestible way, and share that with people, because this is not just effective, but it's almost like a moral duty, right? To make sure that people are aware that these things did take place, and that the myth of Israel as, you know, a land without a people for a people without a land is just that, a myth.
You.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
This one's not from Zoom, but from me personally. So you mentioned that in whether you call it mainstream media or traditional media, there sometimes has been instances of acceptable journalism, or I mean, some kind of quality journalism on the topic of Palestine. And I wonder whether those very few instances where suddenly a journalist in big established media does their job is actually more dangerous to the discourse than if they didn't do it at all, because it gives people the possibility to claim, but look, something's been done. Some journalists have the possibility to be critical. Could you please reflect on that?
Yeah, I get your point. I don't think uh, I see more as a good development, to be honest, because I see it more as uh, media almost being strong-armed into reporting things somewhat accurately sometimes, you know. Of course, I don't think it's beyond them to do this sort of thing, even consciously, to say like, well, let's publish something that's kind of critical here and there, just to make sure that we don't lose our credibility completely, and then keep on parroting IDF propaganda. Is that happening? It might very well be. Like I said, I wouldn't put it past them. But I see it more as, um, just, there's only so much that you can take, that people in general can take of continuing to see a genocide broadcast to them on social media. Just some of the most horrible images that you ever see in your life, almost on a daily basis, and not have that break something inside you and change your views at least a little bit politically. And look, traditional media, they won't sell newspapers, they want to well, not sell newspapers so much these days, but sell ads on their websites and subscriptions and that sort of thing. So I think that when they see these shifts in perception, which we are seeing, by the way, if you look at polls, even in places like Germany, the tide is shifting. The vast majority of people say that they do not agree with what Israel is doing in Gaza, which is, of course, is a very mild statement in the context of what is happening in Gaza. But it is a positive development. So I think they start worrying about their bottom line a little bit. They start being like, okay, look, we need to. They see this generational shift as well, and they're like, we have to make sure that our long-term profitability here isn't affected too much. So I think there are those considerations in place as well. So yeah, again, to answer your question, at least so far from what I've seen, it doesn't concern me too much, and it doesn't really seem to be a concerted effort to make the pro-Palestine stuff, the pro-Israel stuff, even more effective. And even if it isn't being done consciously, I don't think it will have that effect, at least again from the examples that I've seen happen so far.
Thank you. Any final questions from the Q&A or from the room? Yeah, one more question from Zoom by the looks of it.
Yeah, so that's from Zoom. Do you think it's okay to share the worst images and videos from Gaza on social media, especially of dead and critically wounded children and babies? No matter how awful or how much I'm horrified by watching, I want people to understand the gravity and consequence of the horrors the Zionists are inflicting on the Palestinian people. But some people have been complaining because they don't want to see that on their screens.
I think that's a very complicated discussion, and I'm just going to give you the short answer first, which is I'm not sure. I can see the argument for both sides here. Personally, I don't do that very often. I've done that on extremely rare occasions, but not very often. And there's primarily a very simple, selfish reason for it. I can't look at those images. Like I just can't do it. I can't. I've done it unwillingly on several occasions, of course, because it just pops up into your screen. On occasion, kind of forced myself to see it just because I thought it would be important in some way. But I can't do that on a routine basis. I think it would break me too much to the extent that I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't have the clarity of mind to continue to do the things that I've been doing, which have proved to be valuable and effective. So there's this very selfish reason for me not doing that. I understand the arguments for it, but there are some people that I think are a little bit too how should I put it, too hard on how important they think it is, how central to the cause, let's put it that way, they think it is. That is really only through shocking people like that you're going to get them to change their minds. I think that it can be a hugely valuable factor for a lot of people, but for some people, they just can't stand it either, and it won't. Before you get to the part where they build empathy and they change their minds that way, they would just turn away and try to forget about the little that they saw as quickly as possible. And they'll probably make sure that they never see anything that was posted by whoever person or organization published that again. So you have to make sure that, it's not, it can't be so prescriptive like that. You have to sort of, there is an argument for it. There's also, if it was that effective, then this would have stopped a long time ago, because really, how many images of dead children and people blown apart do you need? If that was really the end all be all of effective communications on this topic. I think there's a place for it, and there's also a very sort of moral sort of decision that each one needs to take as well in how much we share those things.
Great, thank you. You happy to take one final question, which is going to come from me, if that's all right. So regarding, it's always nice to close these seminars with, we tend to end up closing them with a practical question of what we can do as activists, as people who are organizing here in Tromsø and at the University of Tromsø. And you mentioned earlier, how important the BDS movement is as a strategy now in, sanctioning, boycotting, divesting. Would you have any practical advice for us how we can use social media to advance this, both, as students and staff at the university, but also more widely in Norway or elsewhere for those of us who are joining us from other countries? And then a final question, any suggestions or recommendations for people we should follow on social media from Palestine or elsewhere?
So the first question, look, I was actually just having this discussion for other reasons in an organizing meeting just yesterday, and we have to realize that there's a lot of myths around what BDS is, and we have to make sure, first of all, that we don't have those myths inculcated into our minds, because sometimes you'd be surprised, like it's a lot of people on the left who are pro-Palestine who have a completely distorted idea of what BDS is, because without realizing it, they're getting most of their information from BDS, from people who are critical of it, and a lot of the seeds of those pieces of criticism come from Israel. It's just sort of like laundered through several levels before it reaches a sort of a polite liberal society in Europe. So you have to make sure that you dispel those myths, first of all, to yourself, and then help dispel those myths to others. So it's a very similar process of where I was mentioning with the Nakba, for example. A lot of people are not aware, even pro-Palestine people, what the Nakba really is, and how important it is for you to know that and for you to spread that to others. It's the same for the BDS movement. So the good news is that the BDS call, the original BDS call, which, by the way, for those of you who are not aware, is the largest coalition of inside of Palestinian civil society, is the BDS National Committee, which sort of organizes the BDS movement worldwide. Their original call, published in 2005, is a very short document. It's on the website. Just Google BDS 2005 call or something along those lines, and you'll find it. You can it's like 1 page long, really. Like, you can read it very quickly, and there you can see that it's a tactic. It's not boycotting for the sake of boycotting. Is using boycott as a tactic, just as it was used as a tactic very effectively against the South African apartheid regime. And so the goals are: 1, end the occupation; 2, the end of apartheid within Israel for Arab citizens of Israel; and 3, the right of return or compensation for refugees and their descendants, as established by UN Resolution, Security Council Resolution 194. And that's it. And also, it's not a boycott of all things Israeli and all Israeli individuals until those things are accomplished. It's selective, it's targeted. There's a list of companies to be boycotted that's very carefully curated by the National Committee in Palestine. Most of these companies are not even Israeli, so it's not what it's often depicted as being in Germany. Kauf nicht bei Juden, don't buy from Jews, which is sort of like associating that with the Nazi call to boycott Jewish businesses. It's not like that at all. Obviously, it doesn't target people for being Jewish. It doesn't even target them for being Israeli. It targets companies for their association with these 3 crimes that are being committed: the occupation, apartheid, and the denial of return to refugees. So you have to dispel those myths and to yourself, and then help dispel them to others. It's also important to make sure that pro-Palestine people are aware of the BDS movement and of this list, because you see these days huge lists being published on social media that sometimes have like 100 companies to boycott because of their supposed association with Israel. It's not really explained why they're being targeted, and in 99% of these cases. To make sure that these people stop spreading these lists, which are counterproductive, because these boycotts need to be targeted, and start following the guidelines of BDS. And that's it, really. I think once people understand these basic facts, that it's a tactic, it doesn't target people for being Israeli, it doesn't target people from being Jewish, it just doesn't target individuals at all, it targets institutions. And that it has goals, it's not just something that's supposed to be done until the end of time. Then I think we can spread awareness very effectively and bring people to the pro-BDS camp. I'm sorry, I went on for way too long and I forgot the second part of your question. People to follow on social media.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Look, this is gonna sound very funny, but I don't consume a lot of content on social media. I mostly do that from the type of content that's coming from friends or that's shared by friends. I very rarely go on TikTok and just start watching TikToks. But on TikTok, I can recommend a few names. Chris Kunzler, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with him. He's based in the UK, and he publishes a lot of very informative content on Palestine. He's very knowledgeable about it. Rathbone for the more lighthearted sort of like comedy sketch type of content. Anat International, I think her handle is both on TikTok and on Instagram. And also I can recommend people who are based here in Berlin, as I am as well, like Salah Said, Rachel Shapiro, who are activists, Palestinian Jewish activists, who have been very active in the very crucial and important and growing movements that we have here in Berlin and in Germany.
Awesome. I think we're at time or even a little bit over. So thank you so much, Lucas, for the discussion and for all your insights into discussing social media and how we can also use it as political activists. So thank you, really informative. And thanks everyone for joining both online and in the room.
Thank you. Thanks to you. Thank you for the very kind invitation. And thanks to all of you for attending and for the questions.